We all use tape measures, and whether it's a 3 metre, 5 metre or 8 metre, whether it's in inches or in metric, they're all pretty much the same and do the same job. But did you know you can actually buy specialised tape measures that excel in a particular activity? So today I'm going to show you 3 specialised tape measures that may make your work more accurate, definitely quicker, and most people don't even know they exist. Specialist tape measures are not that common, and that's why you're never going to see one of these on the shelf at B&Q or Wickes. Having said that, all 3 that I'm showing you today I bought from Amazon. So if you know what you're looking for and you really want one, they're not that difficult to get your hands on, and they're not that much more expensive than a standard decent 5 or 8 metre tape measure. I'll put links to all 3 of them in the description below if you want to have a look at them. And the third one is my favourites, but you're going to have to wait to see what that one does. Let's start with this one, which comes from a company called ProC Carpenter, and it's called Story Pole. A story pole, or story stick as it's sometimes called, is a technique of marking up on a stick measurements that you can then transfer time and time again without having to re-measure everything. This I used recently on the build of my metal bike storage shed to mark out where the fixings were going to be, and I've also used a story stick in the past for tiling to show me quickly where the tiles are going to end up. So using a stick marked up like that is a really good way of replicating whatever measurements you've got time and time again without having to go through the rigmarole of actually reading the tape and adding bits on or whatever. However, sometimes a stick just isn't convenient. Like if you're on a roof, you don't want to be carrying a 16-foot long stick about because you want to measure the centres of something. So a story pole tape measure can do something very similar while still acting as a standard tape measure. Let me show you. So this is a standard tape measure. You'll notice it's in inches rather than decimal. I don't know why they sent me the one in inches, but anyway, you'll understand the same technique whether it's decimal or in imperial. But you'll notice at the bottom of the tape here, there's a clear area with nothing printed on it. And so what that means is that once you get the centres of your rafters or whatever you're fixing, with a pencil, you can easily put a mark on your tape, which means that next time, rather than having to read the tape, you just go to the mark. It's a little bit difficult doing it backwards, but you'll get what I mean. So once you've marked your tape, rather than reading the tape each time, all you have to do is hook it on the end, and then you can transfer those marks onto whatever you're working with. And it's as simple as that. Obviously, if you use a pencil, you can then get a little bit of water and whatever and just rub that out. The other little trick that this tape has is that even at the front of it, it has this big clear white section. So I could actually put, say, project 1 and then say 200 millimeters. So I know from now on that this tape is marked up for project 1 or house 10 or whatever you want to call it, and that's why they've left that clear. And then from now on, rather than having to read the tape, all I have to do is transfer those marks onto my timber or whatever it is, and which should save me time and make sure that everything is very consistent. So that's quite a good idea rather than using a story stick. Right, let's move on to the next one, which is this sort of funny old tape that has no case but has a few tricks up its sleeve. This is a tape measure from Germany from a company called BMI, and this is called the BMI meter tape measure. Nothing to do with body mass index, it's just the German name of the company. This, I think at the moment on Amazon, is £15, and it's essentially a tape measure with no case. But there's a couple of clever things about this that makes this quite nice to use on the workbench. The first thing you notice is it's all wrapped up, and you can actually pull off the end that suddenly pops out like that, and then this little trigger on the inside extends the tape measure, which I think is pretty cool. This is the first tape measure ever that I've found that comes out when you press the trigger rather than goes back in. However, it is a bit of a gimmick. It only goes out a certain way. It doesn't go out too far unless you point it down, and then maybe you can put it out a couple of meters. But that's not the whole point of this tape measure. The point of this tape measure is actually it's great to work with on the bench. So let me rearrange the bench and I'll show you. you'll notice at the end of this tape measure, it doesn't have a wobbly bit like every other tape measure. There's just a fixed plastic section there. So you're never going to hook this onto anything. But if you're working on a bench like this, doing sort of woodwork type stuff, this can be really useful and really easy to use. Let's say I wanted to make sure that my track here was a certain distance from the edge of my MDF. And this at a tape measure just makes that job really easy and really accurate. And one reason it does that is that when you put it on a workpiece, it actually lays flat. And the reason it does that is that it's curved in the opposite direction to every other tape measure. You see, the curve of it is domed upwards rather than downwards. So actually, where you have to mark where all the dimensions are is now actually touching the workpiece rather than away from the workpiece. So because the dome is in the middle and it curves down on each side, then where the markings are is actually touching the workpiece. So if I wanted to mark, let's say 3 inches there, I don't have to wobble it about at all, I just mark 3. Unlike a standard tape measure, where first of all this large wobbly thing at the end gets in the way, and you've got to sort of curve it down to make sure that the tape is actually touching the workpiece, because if you've got it like this, then you're miles away and you don't know where you're going to mark. So if you're using it on a bench and you're using it for, say, woodwork, then that is quite a nice way of it working. If I wanted, let's say 95 millimeters, then it's already there. And for exactly the same reason, if you're using it on a workpiece at all, because it's bent and it's curved and it's flat against a workpiece, you can actually use it as a ruler. It's absolutely straight as a ruler, so it sort of doubles up as a steel ruler that you can then use to draw lines. So if you're doing a lot of woodwork or fine type work on a bench, seriously consider about buying one of these rather than having a standard tape measure with a big hook or whatever. This can be sort of multifunctional and actually makes things a little bit more accurate because it just sits nicely on the workpiece rather than, you know, a standard tape measure where you're forever sort of fighting with this big curve. And the big curve is there so you can stick it out 10, 12 foot when you're on a roof, but that's maybe not so suitable when you're working on timber and you're working doing sort of woodwork jobs on your workbench. So that I think is pretty cool, and definitely the way it opens just means that you can show off to your friends. Right, let's move on to the third one, which is actually my favourite, and it's called a Hultafors Talmeter, probably. So this last tape measure is another diddly version. I bought the 2 meter version here, but I know they do 3 meters and higher than that as well. And it's got a few tricks up its sleeve, especially if you're using sheet material and especially if you're doing anything with dry lining or plasterboard. Let me just show you the underside, because the tab at the end is actually pointed, and at this point where it just goes into the case, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a nasty little point sticking out there, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is, if I'm cutting sheet material, especially say plasterboard, I can use that to mark on my plasterboard the width of what I want to cut. Let's say I want to cut a piece of plasterboard the same width as the red section on my logo here. So all I do is measure the logo, bring it back until that section touches, and now I've got an exact width for that section between this little pointy bit and this little pointy bit without even knowing what that dimension is. And what I can do now is transfer that to my plasterboard. There you go, that is, if I just put my fingers there and feel, that is an absolutely perfect width without having to measure anything or even mark anything. Now that's obviously sort of 300, 350 wide, but it can go anywhere up to as far as you can hold it. So you can imagine people using plasterboard, especially plasterers, being able to do this very quick. And basically they're just transferring the measurement from what they see on the wall onto the plaster sheet and then cut it. But this has still got actually another couple of tricks up its sleeve. you see at the back here, there's another piece of metal that's held in place with this catch. And if I actually remove that catch, the metal spring sort of unsprings itself, and now it's sticking out the back. And what that means is that we can do the same again, but within an inside corner rather than an outside corner. So if we wanted to, we could actually measure the distance between, let's say, here and here. I've now locked it off, and I can do exactly the same again, because even this spring at the end has got a sharp bit on it. So what I can do now is bring that all the way down, and that will score that plasterboard, which makes it really easy to cut then with a Stanley knife underneath and finish it off. But fingers crossed, it should fit just nicely. Well, it does in that gap. That maybe is a bit too tight a fit. But there you go, without a single measurement. If you do actually want an inside measurement and you use this to get an inside measurement, all you have to do is read what it says at this point here and then add 100 millimeters. This is exactly 100 millimeters. And also they've already helped you, because actually if you're going to do that, all you need to do is read the reading in red, which is added on 100 millimeters to the normal reading. So what I've got here looks to me to be 145. So my inside measurement from the tape end to this section that sticks out the back is actually 245. And it's pretty blimmin' accurate, I must say. If I just mark a section there and then measure it, that is 245. The last thing that this tape measure does, if I just wind that in, because you don't necessarily want that sticking out all the time, is at the 100 millimeter mark, but there's a very, very small hole. So once again, using this little section that sticks out here, if I put something sharp in that hole that's 100 millimeters and then put it to whatever dimension I want, let's say 80 millimeters, and then I can actually go round and score a perfect 80 millimeter radius circle using that scoring section at the back, if that's the sort of thing you want to do. So maybe half a dozen different things all in this one little tape measure. And I would definitely think, if I was going to do a lot of plasterboard in, I would definitely consider having this on me rather than taking a measurement, holding that in your head, transferring it to a plasterboard, getting a straight edge of the line. That is definitely could save you quite a lot of time. So consider this if you're going to be doing any plasterboard. That could be a lot quicker. But whether it's this one or the BMI one, or where's my other one? Oh yes, the story pole one. One of these may make your work a lot more efficient, a lot more quicker, and just a lot more easier, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing plasterboard, then definitely this one. If you're a woodworker and you want to use something on the bench, I would highly recommend this BMI one, the one that comes out. Or if you're doing something consistently over and over again and you want a standard tape that you can mark, definitely go for something like this. I hope you enjoyed that and you've learned a little bit. I will see you next time.